Hello and welcome to another episode of the Author Spotlight. Just like yesterday, I have got another published author who's here to share with you their highs, their lows and their lessons learned, hopefully to inspire you and to help you recognise that it's not just you that goes through these emotions and these struggles, but often giving you the clues to get yourself back on track to get that book you're writing out and published. So without any further ado, please welcome Yvonne Guerineau, who I've been practicing her name, so hopefully I've got brownie points. I got that right. I'm just going to double check because it's just come up with a warning message. I didn't quite. We've had trouble streaming to Facebook. This may be an issue on Facebook's end. Oh well, we'll let that go. We'll carry on recording anyway. So Yvonne, welcome to the Author Spotlight. So please tell us a little bit about you and your book.
Lovely. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
I'm what I suppose what you call a personal development enthusiast. I'm the kind of person who hangs around in bookshops for hours on end, prowling in the development, in the business, in the personal growth section. So I had a start in psychology, started a degree in psychology, moved into human resources, spent a lot of time working in business and then as a consultant outside of business, and then most recently specialized in building positive working relationships. So I go into businesses, run workshops and work one-to-one with leaders with the aim of helping them to create the kind of relationships that help them move people on. Because I suppose primarily my clients are evolving businesses going through change and they want to take people with them. That's
fabulous. So with that in mind, let's just pop the name of your book below so that people have got it. So People in Their Element, and I have got a copy here. I do have to say, I was saying this yesterday, but I only could see the other lady's cover because I just thought it looked lovely. But this one feels lovely. So it's not on my question list, but what made you go for a hardback cover?
That's really interesting. So I didn't originally want to do a hardback. I was thinking, oh, that just, who buys a hardback? Because it's a special thing for me. And then I realized, actually, I want something beautiful. And because I'm branded and the hardback comes in color, I thought, actually, this is exactly what I want. My branding is all about something beautiful, feeling good, feeling connected, something tactile, like you just said, something that feels special. And so, it was partly for me, really. But actually, it's amazing how many people have bought the hardback.
Yeah,
so it's not just me who likes something beautiful.
So, and this is the link. If you want to better get out, this is from Yvonne's website, so thehumanalchemist.co.uk/book. So I will put up again towards the end of the video, but whilst we're talking about this book, if you do want to get a copy, this is the place to go to get your copy. So tell me a bit about the book then.
So the book is a journey really for people. So it takes people on a journey from why relationships even register on the radar, why we find them hard at work, why they affect us in the way we do, then through all the things that have an impact on that. So why it is that we find ourselves in these situations, the way we are, the way we interact with others, and then helping, because primarily it's aimed at leaders, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. It could be an aspiring leader, but essentially helping that person then to think, okay, so what do I do now? What do I do about creating better relationships? Where do I put my energy? What do I have to think about? How can I bring my team together to improve relationships in the workplace? So it's a journey, but it's designed to be practical because a lot of my clients who obviously had in mind as I was writing will be people who are in the field doing the job, who want to be able to dip in and out, refer to things as and when they need it. So there's a lot of practical information and examples to refer back to make it as real as possible.
And it's really good to hear you saying about the, remembering who you're writing it for, isn't it? Because if they're time poor, doesn't matter how curious they are, they're not going to get around to doing it. So I'm looking forward to dipping into it myself. As I've said to you, I've been on my travels. I'm back now and I've got a bit more reading time. We had limited space to store physical copies of books while I was away. So I've come back to my reading space now. So thinking about that journey then, so when you decided to write a book to becoming a published author, I said the journey, actually, you may have a different metaphor for you. And I know the lady yesterday was saying it's like wing walking and that she felt quite naked. And I often call it a journey. That's what I saw it as a process. But for you, becoming an author has been like what? What kind of metaphor might you use to describe the process of becoming a published author?
Wow. The journey one is good when you said about the wing walker, I thought, yeah, it feels quite vulnerable. The whole thing does feel quite vulnerable. You feel quite exposed because, I suppose for me as well, because I wrote a prologue, so there was information about me, it had my story in it. And that you suddenly feel like, wow, I'm really telling people something quite real. So yeah, you feel it's an emotional journey, I think, more than anything. Yes, of course, there's information and research and the practicalities of writing, but for me, it was an emotional journey. It was a journey into myself. It was a journey into my business. And I was thinking about that before I came on, what it is and how I would describe it. And I'd say it's a learning curve in every possible direction. You learn about yourself, you learn about the book writing journey. And I'm not even sure that I've learned it all. I've produced one, so I know what happens and how it happens. But thinking if I wrote another one, I think you'd learn more. You'd learn again from a different angle. In the same way that I guess I always teach my clients about relationship building. You learn a skill, you learn a technique, and then you meet someone else and you think, oh, I didn't quite get that this time. I've got to do it differently. So I think it's an ongoing process, really. It's more spiral rather than end destination.
Yeah, I can totally vouch for that. As I said to you briefly on before we came on air, is that I'm writing my second book, and I think I was under the illusion that if I've done it once, I'll know what to do, and it'll be easier and quicker. But it turns out that this is the book I really know I'm on the planet to write, and so a whole different thing of self-learning and growth has come from that, and also learning to take your own advice as you write the stuff for everybody else. So
that's really fascinating that you said that, because I completely feel that too. I feel there's another book, and I feel it'll be a different feeling of vulnerability the next time around.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like you say, even building relationships with people and, getting those positive relationships, there are, when they build, and you do have the ability to be more vulnerable, the more you get to know each other and trust that if you expose this or that actually the relationship itself is okay. And I guess that won't, and I'm in the relationship world as well. That's what, a lot of the work I do. So it doesn't surprise me as we're talking that maybe that's going to happen with every book. Oh my goodness, I think I've got 16 books to write. That's going to be quite a journey. So I better get on with that. So let's back to you though. Yeah. Why did you write this book? So you've got a second book, but why did you write People in Their Element and How to Create Positive Working Relationships?
Well, it's interesting because I think I have several whys, and I think that's probably quite common. So I had a why that was around always having wanted to write a book. I love books. It's something real, something to hold on to. And I'm in a service business. So, anybody who's in a service business will know you do and you do and you do, and you get feedback, and that's lovely. But you have nothing to show necessarily for what you've done. And there's something about a book that it's lasting and it's very real and it comes round and round. And I needed that for me. I needed something to show for my efforts. But I think I also needed to go on this journey that I described. I think it is a personal development journey. And I had to uncover the things that I know and what I know and why I know them and how it all hangs together. Because I was going to see my clients and I was sharing this information and I was working with them. But I realized there's things I wasn't saying because I wasn't sure how to say them, or it just didn't fit into the context. And I thought, no, it needs to all go in. There needs to be a place where I hold all this information that explains to someone from beginning to end what it is I do and why I do it and what I mean when I say the things I say, or what sits behind what I do. Yeah. And social media doesn't do that. Blogs don't do that. You need to go deep. And a book was this opportunity to go deep, to go a bit, to build relationship at a deeper level with a person one-to-one. Yeah. And I think the other why that hasn't come through yet is that I guess I also wanted to be able to offer something to the people who can't buy my workshops. So the manager who doesn't have the budget, the person that doesn't have a manager who wants to have a budget, the person who wants this development but doesn't know how to book a workshop or doesn't have the time or the ability for whatever reason at this point in time. So to give people access to this information without having to commit on a bigger scale straight away.
Yeah. And picking up on that middle why, that's about the, getting the words for it. I think that's one of the wonderful things about the book writing process, isn't it? Is that you clarify what you mean by what you say, because it's going to be permanently in print. And I realize now when you're in conversation, we can be a bit more generic or not really very clear. So what's been the impact for you in working, in clarifying what you mean by what you say through this process?
It's exactly that. So for me, one of the main learnings from the journey was that I now have to be quite specific about what is it I do and how I do it and why I do it that way. There's a lot of room for being wishy-washy and changing direction and adapting what you say when you're face to face with someone. With a book, you haven't got the choice.
No.
And that was the biggest move, I guess, for me in the book, and what it needed to do for me is it helped me clarify my message. And you know, one of the main things for me that happened halfway through is I also rebranded. So one of the things I said about the hardback and wanting it to be this beautiful branding, I didn't have that branding when I started the book. The book led me to the branding. The book led me to realize that the way I was presenting didn't fit with the message I wanted to send. And therefore, halfway through the writing process, I went, wow, this is not who I am. And it gave me the confidence to say, no, I need to reframe the way I present myself. So actually, it released a whole lot of information to me about how I wanted to present my message.
Fabulous.
It does that for you as well in a way that you don't see coming.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So the question I had was, what's the most important thing you've learned? So you've mentioned there that you've learned that you can't be wishy-washy, and you have to be, I don't think that was your word, structured, but it creates a process really by putting the book, and it's released this whole sense of, you know, who you are and how you want to present yourself. Is that the most important lesson, or is there something else that you've learned through this process?
I think wishy-washy was quite a weird word. I think flexible is the word I use. Flexibility to do what you want.
Yeah.
Biggest lesson? I think the biggest lesson is that the answers are there and it'll come out if you trust the process. I think trusting the process is something I can do in workshops. I've always done in workshops. I trust that the right things will rise to the surface. I didn't have that trust that I could write that way. And I think probably my biggest lesson is that, yes, it works the same way in every situation. If you trust the process and you stick with it, things will rise to the surface and it will get done.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing I learned that was interesting is how supportive the community is. I thought people would be like, you're writing a book? But it wasn't. People actually said, wow, you're writing a book, and people were supportive and people encouraged. I didn't expect that. The support was huge. People offering advice and support who have written books. It's not competitive in the way that I thought it might be.
And what kind of community is that are supportive and encouraging?
Anybody who I knew who was an author was quick to be helpful, to be supportive, to say, have you considered this? It's good you're doing that, just making suggestions, sharing their experiences. Even people offering to say, do you want a one-to-one to talk about, you know, how to structure this, or if you get stuck, let me know. Because I think those of us who've been on this journey, and I'm sure I would be the same and you are the same, those of us who've been on this journey, we now know it's hard. We know about the emotional turmoil. We know what happens to get stuck. We know what happens when we can't say what we want to say, or it just doesn't look right and we can't get the message across the way we would if we were speaking. We know the frustrations, and people are willing to offer help and time to get people through that because they know what it's like.
Yeah,
and I think
absolutely.
that knowing, people don't have that until they've done it. You think you know, but you don't know.
And I think it's a big thing, like you said, about in conversation, you could be more flexible. And I think the other thing I think we forget as authors is that when we're having a conversation with, maybe we're on stage or you're talking or presenting or running workshops, you're getting feedback from your audience. You're getting a nod or or I don't get it. And so those feedbacks is what makes you change what you're saying, not because you're constantly being wishy-washy and being, you know, but you're adapting what you're saying based on the feedback you're getting in that feedback loop, aren't you? Yes. And I think when we're trying to write, if people become quite solitary, is that the right word? But do things in isolation when they're writing, obviously it is their stuff, but they forget that you need those conversations, you need those feedback loops. You need people to look at what you've written and you can say it to them and then work out whether what you said, like verbally, is what's written down. And I think that's one of the big things that people forget to do when they're writing books, is to remember that in everyday life or even your journey of life, you've collected that information as part of a systemic process.
Yeah.
All your senses have been involved to create the reactions and responses in the moment, and to recall that information to be able to write about it. You often need that community, that stimuli, those conversations. Absolutely. So it's really great that you've had that.
And it's the reason I hired a mentor. You know, it's the reason Karen and I worked together, is that I knew I needed that bounce around because I take energy from other people. That's why I run workshops. And it's exactly that. It's a big deal suddenly to put your writing in front of somebody. Whereas when you're having a conversation, you get an immediate feedback. You know whether something's landed. It's a completely different thing.
But I don't know about you, but it sort of makes me think, but there's something about when it's verbal, it sort of goes off into the ether. But when it's written, maybe this is just me. I'd love you to know whether it's the same for you. It feels more permanent, and therefore you have to be more assured with it before you start saying, because once it's written, you're like you say, you're going to have to follow your own process, follow your own models, use your own language, which hopefully if you got it right, you're using your own language in the first place, but it may not be the language you use all the time consistently. So there is some vulnerability when you make it a permanent way of describing something.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. The word permanent is what terrified me at the start, because you can't take it back. It won't pass through and then disappear and people will forget about it. It's not like just a moment in time. The book's out there, it's on someone's shelf, you can't take it back. And that felt terrifying for a while. But actually now that's what I love the most about it. I love the fact that it's stood there and someone can refer back to it. I think the bit that I needed to get my head around, though, was, yes, it's permanent and the book is out there, but I am still allowed to change my mind. I am allowed to develop, and I am allowed to grow, and I am allowed to write another book in 3 years' time where I've moved on. And I think that's the bit you also have to, I think that's maybe what holds people back. And it maybe held me back for a long time. It's like, well, when will I be ready? When will the book be ready? When will I be good enough to write? When will I be fully formed to write this book? When in reality is I'm fully formed now with what I have. And I think it's something I read a while ago that somebody had said, I have strong opinions loosely held. And I thought, well, I can feel firmly that this is good now, but it is okay to evolve and become wiser, and to wake up in 3 years' time and say, yeah, actually, I don't buy that model anymore. I'm going to change that.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a valuable thing for anybody watching the video now, especially as authors, because it's a big thing that can hold people back. Either a fear that someone might challenge them on it. Certainly there's stuff in my first book, because it's 2016, that I've had, there's some of the neuroscience has moved on. We know more. So it's like, so if I went back, I'd reword it slightly differently and use it more as a metaphor than as a definitive model, because they now know something about the brain they didn't know then. And maybe they did know it then and I just didn't know it. But the model that I had and the language around it still is really useful. It still enables conversations. And it's so important as authors for us to recognize that we are writing about a moment in time with the wisdom we've got. I think it's as Angela Mayer that says, when you know better, do better. And it's like, it's being okay with, this is what we know that's good for us now. And our next iteration or our next book or whatever will be an evolution of that.
It's a bit like if you read an Enid Blyton now, I mean, some of the things I had to explain to my son why they had to go into a hallway to answer the telephone. Because the concept, some of the things that were in books are now so dated, you have to explain it to that generation. But it doesn't mean it wasn't a good book. And
no.
I think
and it's got value, hasn't it?
Yeah, complete. The fear of the permanence, I think, is, especially if you're writing a non-fiction book, because it will date. It will date. Most of them will. And to know that it's still okay to move on anyway, and you can't get everything in. And Karen will say that to people, you can't get everything into one book. So it's okay to leave things out. It's okay that it won't do everything for everyone. It's not encyclopedic in the sense that you have to cover everything and anything.
And I do remember her saying to me, and there's always a second edition, as she's doing with the book Marketing Made Simple, which, as she's discovered, second editions aren't as simple as perhaps she thought it was going to be. But it's actually been, it's been, but she's learned a lot about the process, and she's learned about a lot of stuff that she started doing new stuff and hadn't really consciously become aware that there was new marketing. Some of it she was conscious of, but as you go through that process, so there's always second editions. I think we forget that we can update our stories. And it's good actually to do it, that filter. I've gone back through my book and think, if I did it again, and there is just that one thing on neuroscience, but actually the rest of it stands true. So it isn't worth financially, from a business perspective, changing it for that one thing, because actually the rest of it's okay.
And people still refer back to books that are very old now.
Yeah.
because there was still an important nugget of information there that was important to reflect on, even though science has moved on. And I think, there's a lot of us as well will probably suffer from this "am I expert enough" syndrome. If I'm not the person who did the research, am I in a position to comment on it? And the reality is yes, because I read it and I have an opinion on it, and it might move, but for now I have an opinion. It's like you said with the neuroscience, the science will move on. If we only ever waited until we were 100% sure, there'd be no scientists studying anything and documenting anything ever.
But so I also believe that when you do what's right for you, so like you have really thought about the cover and the how this feels, and so it's real. And I think so you and I, you go in a bookshop, you might be attracted to a cover because of the color or the wording or whatever. And so I believe even if 20, 30 of us were saying exactly the same words, in person, we know we're different heights, different gender, different tone, different accent. And the same with our writing and our books. I truly believe there's an audience that will only get the message when we speak. There's an audience for us as an individual. And that even if we were writing the same thing, obviously you wouldn't do that because it's copywriting and all that stuff. But even if you had said exactly the same thing, there are some people that just wouldn't resonate with it until they get your copy.
Yes, and also I do it in my workshops. I mean, I've seen people in workshops who've seen some of this material several times, and I often say, yes, but you weren't the same person then. 5 years ago, you saw this, or you saw this model, or you heard this message, but you weren't ready to hear it. Now you're in a different place. So I've read books that had no impact on me that other people rave about, but then I've read books that other people are like, yeah, and I'm like, but that's had a huge impact on me, and it's because of who I am at the point when I read it. Which is why you can go back to some books and read them again and get a different takeaway. Which I think is why I also wanted mine to be a dip in and out book. You can come back to it in a year and maybe get something else.
I can so relate. I'm looking at my bookshelf there. There's a few there. Even the E-Myth, like people rave about that one, and I haven't got it yet. But and I think
it might come. It might never come.
Do I want to bother to try and read it just because everybody else seems to think it's great? And I think it's recognizing that there's those with resonance. So with that, so what do you wish you'd known before you started?
What I wish I'd known before? Lots of things. Actually, I'm glad there's a lot of things I didn't know before I started. things I wish I'd known. I think I wish I'd known more about what I knew. So I wish I'd known the value of some of the things that I know that I take for granted. That there is, I wish I'd got over some of these "am I good enough" hurdles faster, I guess.
What worked for you to get over these "am I good enough" hurdles?
I think just sticking with it. I think the minute Karen and I started working together, I knew that there was someone there to keep nudging me along. So whenever I got stuck, there was someone to help me along. I wish I'd known that there were people like her, because I didn't for a long time. I thought a book was something where you sat yourself in a corner and you wrote, because that's how it's been presented, I guess, on TV. The author that takes himself away to a lodge somewhere in the middle of a forest and sits there for 3 months and writes a book in solitude. That it could be done alongside the day job, alongside the family, that there were people who can help you through that. I hadn't even known there was such a thing as a book mentor like Karen until, I'd say, a couple of months before I started writing.
Right.
So that's good. I wish I'd known that help was out there and that you can get help with the process.
Fab. She will be happy to hear that. What was your lowest point? Because obviously you talked about the emotionals, and there's obviously highs and lows with this journey.
I guess it depends on the type of book you're writing. For me, the emotional low was probably reprocessing some of my story. So remembering some of the downs that have fed into why I do what I do. So the prologue was hard work. And actually the prologue I wrote first, then I wrote most of the book. Then I went back to the prologue, and the prologue was still hard the second time round. And that was probably the most painful part, is kind of reliving some of that. But then at the same time, you have to go through that because it's the reason I'm good at what I do. And to be able to say that I'm good at that is because I've had to go through that process. I've had to learn the things I've had to learn to be the person that I am, which is what makes the book. But
what's been the impact of going through that then, and sort of having to relive that and write that prologue?
I think there's an opportunity to rewrite your story a little bit. So I think when you live it the first time, or you remember it, you process it as a very personal experience. When I wrote the prologue, I was now writing it for how is this of use to somebody else? and it makes you look at it differently. You suddenly see the opportunities, you suddenly see what can someone take from this lessons that maybe the first time you didn't see. So you remember a painful experience, or you remember something that happened, but now you can see it again through the eyes of how to help someone else get through that faster.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, yes, there's value. I don't regret it, but it wasn't easy.
No. And I think that's where the support comes in, isn't it? It's important to have that. And that's often where my partnership with Karen is there. So if there is trauma to the point where and I don't mean just to be sort of undermining it, the process of writing it the first time and then having to reread it and then rewrite it and editing is often the a way of changing the story, changing the relationship that the past has on the present, which is what therapy is ultimately.
Yeah, and it is a therapeutic process. I did find writing the book quite therapeutic, and I do understand the therapeutic process because I've been in it for myself in other ways. And therapeutic just means there's a healing element to it. It doesn't mean you see a therapist. So it might be therapeutic to write certain parts of the book that you never publish.
Yeah.
And there are things that I found very therapeutic to write that are not in the book, that may not ever be in a book, but it was useful writing it down and then removing it. It was good. It was a good process. So actually, sometimes it's good to say to someone as well, write it down. Doesn't matter. It might not go in, but maybe the process
that is such an important thing, because I think that people almost get fearful of writing it because of that permanency as well, that once it's there, then I have to include it, because then they have to go through that whole deciding to let it go or not include it.
And there's loads of stuff I took out of the book.
It is such an important part of it. And I know for me on the first book, there was a part of my story that I gave it out and I had 6 peer review read it. And when I got their feedback, I realized I didn't need to put it in the main book. I took it out and I realized I just needed it to be witnessed and honored by a few people. But I didn't need everyone to know that. And it might not be, I don't need to know it yet, or maybe I don't ever need them to know it. I don't know. But in that moment, it was very, very clear when it came back that there was something changed in me, that someone had honored it and they'd witnessed it. But I needed those 6 people to do it. And then I was able to remove it from the book because it wasn't, as you say, adding value necessarily. It wasn't going to help the reader.
And it might also be that it's not for this audience. So at the moment, this book is written for a business audience, for leaders. But, I may at some point, one of my other books may be, if there are other books, which is not something, by the way, I ever said before I wrote the first one, that there was ever going to be another one. I thought that was the end of the line. But once you've got the bug, you've got the bug. So now I'm writing other books in my head that I haven't written yet. But one of the things that I realize is that some of that message isn't for these people. There will be a different set of people who may read a different book. It's a different audience, and they will therefore relate to the story differently. So what I did is I told my story for this perspective, but I can see now how an autobiography is very all-encompassing of your story. But you could write 6 books and share a prologue that is still very true, but that doesn't touch on all the same memories, the same events, the same parts of your story. And when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, there's a lot of story.
Absolutely. Wait till you get to your late 50s.
Well, I've read a book by someone who's 93 when she wrote her book, and she was an Auschwitz survivor. And my goodness, she sees life differently at 93 than she would have done in her 40s. So, a lot of things can still happen.
And that comes back to you being very clear about who you were writing the book for, isn't it? And I get it. And there is that thing of I call it chatting with purpose, and this is writing with purpose. It's like, why am I saying this? Is it for the benefit of the recipient, or actually is it more cathartic and I'm saying it for my benefit in the verbal world? And the same will happen with the writing process. There will be sometimes you go through a process of having to write something. And I guess what I want to share with people listening is that I think, and I'm hearing from you, is allow yourself to have that say, allow yourself to write whatever you're thinking and feeling in the moment, because my experience is you waste a lot of time trying not to say it, trying not to write it. And actually you can always choose not to put it in the book, but maybe it just needs to be witnessed by yourself as part of that process of writing. Otherwise you get consumed by trying not to write, I think, and it takes up an awful lot more energy. That's a really great thing to hear. So what's been your biggest success to date?
The feedback by leaps and bounds. The standing presenting the book was lovely, celebrating the launch was lovely, putting it on Amazon was lovely. All these moments are fabulous. Putting it out for peer review and going, gosh, it gets actually out there. Those are wonderful moments. But when somebody sends you an email where they've gone onto the website specifically to send you a message to say, I've just finished your book, this is what I got from it. And those were the things I wanted people to get from it. And to see that and to say, yes, it did what I set out to do, huge sense of success.
Yeah.
You know, if 60 people buy the book and think it's average, then it doesn't really do anything. If one person buys the book and they think it was great and it changed their life, it was worth it. And I think that it's not about, you know, I said this to somebody recently, there's best sellers and there's best book. And you can sell millions because everyone else is buying it.
Yeah.
But you can
they never read it.
They never read it, but you know, you should have one because everyone's got one.
Yeah, yeah.
Or you could write a book that less than 1 million people buy, but that changes people's lives. And if you set out to want to have an impact, then that's way more valuable than selling millions to people who just want to put on their shelf to look good.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
You know, for me, it's more about the impact than it is about the millions of books. Obviously, if you can impact millions of people, that's great.
Yes, absolutely. So have you got an example of that feedback, or am I putting you on the spot now to remind you of what people have got from the book that's sort of really, you thought, oh, that's what I wanted you to get?
Yeah, so the kind of things I'm getting, and I won't be able to do it word for word because I'm not that good at remembering the detail of what people say, but it was things like, I had a real aha moment that this is what happens to me. So somebody might have said, oh, in chapter 4 where it says, you know, minding your mind in terms of how you respond to people, there were some things in there where somebody said, wow, I didn't realize I did that. Now I know that I'm going to look out for it. Or they said, you know, reading this book has given me the confidence to go to my manager and say, this is what's going on for me. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
Or they said, gosh, I didn't realize there was so much science behind it. It was just intuitive. It's nice now to have something meaningful to use.
Mm-hmm.
And exercises, people who said, oh yeah, I'll put that back on the shelf and I'll use that again. And I thought, yes, that's exactly what I want. I want you to put it back on the shelf and refer back to it again.
Absolutely.
Which is what I want as a reference guide. So those are the sorts of things that I was hoping to hear, which is what I'm getting back.
That's absolutely brilliant. So it's a great, just a finish on that, Riz. I'm going to pop the book up there again, and also the link if you want to buy a copy of the book. Please do reach out to Yvonne Guerineau. I've practiced how to say that. So thank you for giving me a clue how to do that. And find out more about the people in their element, how to create positive working relationships. I'm very excited to have my reading time this week and get stuck into that book as well.
Yeah, let me know how you get on.
I will do. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode, and hopefully we'll get you back maybe in a year's time, and you can let us know about all those impactful conversations you've had with people since writing. Thank you, Yvonne.
That would be fabulous. Thanks for having me, Sheryl.
You're very welcome. So that brings us to the end of today's show, Author Spotlight, which is all about discovering the highs and lows and the lessons learned from published authors. And it is sponsored by the author's coach, the book mentor, Librotas. I've got my tongue tied now, Karen Williams from Librotas. So if you are struggling with writing a book and you could do with that confidant, that little kick up the bum, that bit of encouragement, the questions that you need to be asked or you need to be asking yourself in order to make your book writing dream a reality, then please do reach out to myself or Karen. Without any further ado, until the next episode, I'll see you soon.